states that the robot must protect its own existence. Ah, the first real robot called Billy Dog was created in 1929.
And we manipulate that slightly and look at how people station, and while he's charging his batteries, the children can go on playing with him, and that way they don't feel that he's just a toy that ran out of batteries, but he's an actual battery.
We'll start very soon. Thank you for joining us. We're just missing one speaker, but I think we'll start anyway. Good evening. Very good, thank you. My name is Alexandra, and I'm very, very pleased to welcome you tonight to this event. Thank you for coming and taking the time in this fabulous weather to join us. I'm here on behalf of Lirec, which is the research group that you, the demos of which you saw earlier, if you did see the demos. If you didn't, you will hear about the project specifically from Peter in this presentation. But basically the objective tonight is to complement what's happening at the Science Museum at the moment, which is called Robotville, and complement it with a conversation about what are robots, and what do we mean when we mean a robot, both from the perspective of a piece of hardware somewhere to an app to something that might be other. And Dan, who will be joining us shortly, will also bring a lot with respects to that. So on our panel, Olivia will kind of present the panel, but I'm really, really pleased to have Olivia Solon from Wired UK join us as chair of this panel tonight. And the format is very simple. We'll start with Olivia and then have a panel discussion and Q&A and more drinks and more nibbles. If you have any questions at all that you would like to ask, both ask them and also ask them on Twitter. And the hashtag is RobotFutures in one word for this event, in case you're using the internet. So that's it, and introducing Olivia.
Excellent. Hello, and thank you for the introduction, Alex. When I started thinking about this panel, the first robots that kind of sprang to mind were things like the Terminator and C-3PO and Rosie the Jetsons butler robot and the Cylons. And they're all these kind of incredibly intelligent and nimble, dexterous robots that you never see plugged into an energy source. And obviously they're all fictional. And then I started thinking about kind of Asimo, which is Honda's humanoid robot, and it's probably, I think, one of the most advanced humanoid robots in the market at the moment. And it's beautiful to watch, and it can run up and down stairs and respond to voice commands. But if you've seen it being set up, and I have done, it takes about a day to set it up. It needs at least one person to control it, if not two. Its battery lasts only about an hour, and it takes 3 hours to charge up. So now let's consider some of the robots that have been commercialized and are actually kind of selling. We've got the Roomba vacuum robot that looks a bit like a hockey puck. There's the PackBot, which is sent down tunnels in Afghanistan to kind of seek out IEDs and things like that. And it looks a bit like a kind of small tank. Then we've got Pleo, the lovely little interactive toy dinosaur, which is very sweet. But what about internet bots? You know, software applications that run automated tasks over the internet. These are kind of all the robots that are either selling in their thousands or pervasive on the web. But none of them would make particularly good robot costumes at Halloween. So, what is a robot? Is it supposed to look like us? Should it look like any of the ones we've seen in sci-fi movies? Does it even have to have a physical body? Should they be social or purely functional? Will we all have robot butlers in the future, or will robots take over and kill all their creators? Thankfully, I have an expert panel with me tonight who are much better equipped to answer at least some of those questions, I hope. First of all, we're going to hear from Peter McCowan. He's the Professor of Computer Science in the School of Electronic Engineering and Computer Science at Queen Mary University. Then we're going to hear from Ghislaine Boddington. She is an artist and curator involved in the integration of body-responsive technologies and virtual physical blended worlds. Thirdly, we're going to hear from Matt Jones, the principal at the London design studio Berg. They've been making the headlines this week with their Little Printer project. Little Printer, which I think he's going to be showing us today. Oh, look, it's just there. And then finally, we're going to hear from Dan O'Hara, who's a philosopher and literary critic. Oh, I can't even say that. He's a philosopher and literary critic and a lecturer in English and American literature at the University of Cologne and head of research and development at Filter Factory. So let's start with Peter McCowan.
Okay, so once again, just to echo my thanks to all of you for coming along this evening. As I said, my name is Peter McCowan. I'm actually the coordinator of the Lirec project, which hopefully some of you have had a chance to see the kind of showcase robots over at the Science Museum. Unlike my distinguished colleagues who have small robots to bring along, all our robots tend to be quite large, which is why we couldn't have them here in the room. When I was asked to do this kind of introduction to set the scope, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Lirec project, but also to talk more generally about my thoughts, ideas, and some of the research work that I've done in robotics and artificial intelligence, because I think that's a useful context to set for the discussions later on. So my first robots that I was actually involved in building were with Fidian Warman, sitting in the second row here, the guy with the beard. I used to work with Soda Creative, who were a fine arts company in Bethnal Green. And what we did was we created a series of pogoing punk robots. So these were about 6 foot high robots with wonderful pneumatic pistons in them. Pneumatic pistons are great for being able to get things to move up and down, which fortunately is exactly what punk used to do in the way of pogoing. I'm glad some of you remember punk. When I go into schools and talk about this, I have to explain that punk is a kind of music movement in the 1970s involved jumping up and down. 1 degree of freedom dance, absolutely brilliant. So what we did was we created some software that took Fidian's music collection from when he was a kid and into punk, as was I, and trained the robots up so they would recognise the patterns and the sounds within Fidian's punk music collections. And also, they would not like the other kinds of music we played to it. So there's a bit of kind of aversion therapy. We played a bit of classics and say, don't you dance? A little bit of R&B, but don't you dance? And eventually, over a period of time, using adaptive algorithms, the robots learned to pogo when they heard punk music, a little bit like the music that they'd been trained on. And then the twist came, which was that we actually stuck Fidian in a costume on the stage at the ICA with a band called Neurotic. And the robots, who were actually kind of little mental models of him as a 17-year-old out there in the audience. You can imagine the health and safety issues of putting pogoing robots amongst a live audience of potentially chemically altered people in a large public building. And Fidian had to play punk music to himself as a child out there, embodied in these robots, such that they pogoed and became ecstatic and joyous, or alternatively just sat around and sadly pathetic, in which case the old Fidian would have failed miserably. I'm glad to be able to report that the new Fidian was able to excite the young Fidian in his robot body in ways that I can't go into now. And the other bands, some of the support bands, it was a kind of country and western punk fusion group there, and the robots didn't like them. It quite annoyed them actually, because they were saying, oh, the robots pogoing. Not that they're broken, they just don't like the music. So this was great. It was sponsored by Wellcome Trust because it got a whole lot of new people interested in understanding something about robots and something about neuroscience, like the way our brains are connected together, which is my research area. And the other thing to say just before passing on was, these robots did not want to take over the world. They just wanted to dance. So, on to Lirec. Lirec is a project that's funded by the European Union. It's actually one of the largest robotics projects, I think, that's been funded by the Union at this particular time. And the idea of the Lirec project is to try and develop robots that can be used in a range of different scenarios where they are a form of tool, a form of technology with which you build up a socially meaningful relationship. So we've all heard of kind of user-friendly software. The idea is now to build a series of tools that are aware of the social niceties of interactions, so you could build up a kind of bonding and companionship, a kind of user friendship in a very loose way with that technology if you want to continue working with it. The novelty of Lirec is that we're looking at long-term relationships. There's something called the novelty effect. You play with a robot in a lab, everyone has great fun with it, and then after a day or so you get bored. What is it that you can do to ensure that people want to continue to interact and use the support that these kinds of tools have? So long-term relationships is a key part to it. So we're developing new technologies, but we're also developing new ways of thinking about how those technologies interact with human users. And part of the inspiration from that comes from work with our Hungarian partners, who are dog ethologists. They study the behaviour of dogs. Dogs are a very nice model. We feel very socially bonded to dogs, and yet dogs, for example, have no language as such. So understanding how we interact with pets and build that bond with dogs starts to give us some behaviours that we can then transport into the robots. So, for example, in the robot house scenario, which I know some of you went to see in the secret location somewhere in Hatfield, the robots try to attract your attention using the kinds of behaviours that dogs do. They kind of sit and kind of shake from side to side and make beeping noises in a way that means that there's kind of socially meaningful semaphore that's going on in there. Each of the different scenarios, the robot house scenario, there's one where we're looking at robots helping in an office, and another where we have robots actually teaching children how to play chess in a kind of educational support scenario. All of these are real, out of the lab, social scenarios. We don't know what's going to happen in these kinds of scenarios, and the robots are very limited in what they can do because the technology is still fairly limited in what's available in the world at the moment. And we have to work out ways of being able to overcome, for example, these issues with the fact that robots need recharging. And one of the things we found in some of the early studies with the Pleo robot, the robot dinosaur, was that the relationship with a Pleo broke down when the robot had to go off and be charged. In fact, some people actually just saw it as the robot dying. So one of the ways we got around that is through something called migration, and hopefully some of you saw a demonstration of that over at the Science Museum, where you interact with the Pleo robot, it learns, interacts with you, and then when the robot moves to a point where it is recharging, what happens is the entity, the intelligence, actually the computer program that was in the Pleo robot body, moves into a mobile phone where you can continue to interact with it, it can continue to learn, and then once mum and dad or whoever charged up the robot, it can come back and it can migrate back from your mobile phone into the robot body with knowledge of the interactions that you had with it there. So you're blurring the line between the physical embodiment and the virtual embodiment actually on the phone. And so this whole idea of using ideas from biology through understanding how people rate personalities in dogs, again, is another way that we start to build believable characters that people want to continue to interact with. But these characters should want to support you in doing something. These are socially aware tools. So the only other point I'd mention in here is the fact that, and these are some of the scenarios that are in there, one of the issues that we're particularly focusing in on, apart from this migration, this idea of being able to take the entity and move it onto different bodies, is how to make that seem socially sensible. There's no biological analogue of that. You can't transfer your mind from one body to another. But we have to build up ways of being able to understand how people can understand that the robot entity they've interacted with is now inhabiting another body. And so we've been looking quite a lot at ways of giving socially meaningful cues for that, to be able to build that continuity of character, continuity of personality across there. For those of you who haven't seen this before, I'm sure many of you have, this is Maury's Uncanny Valley. What it basically says is that from the research that's been done recently, and in fact over a fairly long period of time, this seems quite a robust structure for many people, that as you move a robot more and more and more to look like a human being, obviously if it's identical to a human being, you can tell no difference between it, it will be as acceptable as a human being. But as you move away from it, it still looks humanoid, but isn't quite humanoid. You drop into this dip called the Uncanny Valley. where people start to not particularly like interacting with those sorts of robots because they look a bit spooky, they're a bit like a zombie. They're human, but they're not quite human. We've deliberately in Lirec moved way down the curve there so that we're building robots that look like robots. And part of the reason for that is that if you have a robot that looks too much like a human, people will walk up to it and expect it to have a load of capacities and abilities that our robots just don't have. And by building robots that look like robots, then you are kind of controlling the expectations of the users in there. So we very deliberately have created things so that they don't look specifically like humanoid type robots, like your C-3POs and so on. In fact, one of the robots that hopefully you've all had a chance to see, Charlie, can actually change its facial features by recognising your face and then morphing its face into yours. So there's an interesting question there about whether or not we feel more comfortable interacting with a robot that looks like us, because there seems to be some evidence that we kind of like interacting with people that look like us within the psychological literature. Just a couple of final things to throw into the mix. Looking at photorealistic creations, and in this case avatars, some of the work that I've been doing with the psychology department over at University College has developed a new technology that allows you to be able to take the motion of one person's face and use it to drive another person's. So I can be speaking and I can take the motion of my face and I can take somebody else's face photorealistically and make them say the words I've said even though they haven't actually said those words. So that ability to map across like a puppetry where the movements of my face are the strings that will move the features of another person's face in a very photorealistic way allows us to have the ability to start to think about generating photorealistic avatars that will look exactly like human beings and therefore be up at the high end of the uncanny valley part of it, but are actually synthesized. And so there's lots of applications in this, possibly in the future with video phones, instead of having a ringtone or a face tone, you're able to download whoever's face you fancy speaking out through. And then the final thing that I just wanted to touch on was this idea of creativity and robots and artificial intelligence, because this is an area that crops up a lot in discussions that I have. So this is some work I did a couple of years ago with some funding from the Arts Council, where I'd actually built a mathematical computer model of the way that the early parts of the human brain, the parts like the visual cortex there, recognise what are interesting things in an image. And from that you can produce something called a saliency map that picks out the parts that your eyes will tend to kind of track to when you look at the picture. Over the top of that you can stick a smart graphics there. Human artists tend to, when they're painting, use very fine brush strokes in the areas of high interest to them, broader brush strokes in the other. So this does exactly that. It takes a picture in, it processes it with this model, this mathematical mimicking of the human brain's ability to spot what's interesting in the scene and then paints pictures with it. So we got a whole of them printed up. We had them as part of the Inside Out Arts exhibition over in the East End of London. A lot of people came in, were very impressed by the prowess of the artists, and some of them got slightly miffed at the end of it when the small plaque said these were all done by a computer. But my question, which is always nice to have a bit of controversy, but my question there is always, what do we mean by creativity? And given that our brain is clearly creative and is built up from a series of mushy kind of electrochemical switches rather than electronic switches, how far can we move towards computer creativity? So those are just some of the things I get up to in my spare time when I'm not coordinating the Lirec project. And believe you me, coordinating the EU project takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But hopefully you'll be impressed by some of the stuff you've seen over here. I'm sure we'll have some interesting discussions afterwards. So I've been Peter, and you've been fantastic. Thank you very much.
And I work within a designing collective called Body Data Space. We're based in East London, and one of our key areas, one of my expertise areas, is telepresence and telematics. So this is going forward too fast, so I'll take that back. So one of the things I want to say is I'm not a robot expert, but I am an expert on body technologies and interactivity with the body. So the angle I'm going to come to you from is that, and from projects where we're working with robots. So key work for us since the mid-90s has been with telepresence and telematics, and we've done many projects linking remote spaces. So key in this is relativity and how actually we deal with each other in remote situations, with others coming to us from a distance, and how we actually deal with sense enhancement and develop a more intuitive and intimate feel when we're working with others at a distance in telepresence situations. Across the last few years, we've developed that work into working also with avatars. So actually looking at our relativity when we represent ourselves as avatars within space, and when we deal with ourselves and others within that virtual physical spaces. So it's looking at the blending between the two and the building of relationships. So we have an avatar called Lirec, who goes out in performance terms and in installations, quite part of the uncanny valley edge, I think, because she's slightly eerie and she follows you around the space when she's watching a motion capture situation. And she is part also of a key project at the moment that we're doing, another EU project actually called Robots and Avatars. So Robots and Avatars has been supported by Nesta across the last 2 years, and has just moved through into EU support. And it's really looking at how young people will work and play with representational forms of themselves and with others in virtual and physical life across the next 10 to 15 years. So coming into the robot side of it, this is a key slide for robots and avatars. We're looking at the body, the human body at the centre of digital interaction, and we're exploring with a range of people, experts and artists and creatives, the move of the body towards the cyborg and the move of the body towards the avatar. So looking at how does the body extend, enhance itself, and how do we look at the live, moving, sweating, emotional body at the centre of digital interactivity. So particularly looking at a mixed environment of vis-a-vis engagement, telepresence, robotics and avatars, and that kind of workspace, play space of the future. Mixed environment for young people today. So onto the robot bit particularly. I'm going to quickly go through a few slides. These have been taken from Google mainly, but you'll know them. They're dancing robots and music instruction robots. So robots that work with you, with the body to instruct and teach. Aid robots in health and well-being, in hospitals and in care situations that are helping with mobility issues, such as being able to pick up something very small for patients that can't. And of course, the expressing human emotions in conversation robots. These are the Korean robots that are supposedly the most advanced in the world. But as Peter mentioned, they do generally have one ability to sing or to do languages, and these are the kind of hostesses with the mostesses of that world. So, and I think that's a good point, actually, what you expect from something as it reaches this more human feel. Professor Noel Sharkey, who's one of the champions of robots and avatars, actually we did a whole series of discussion around artificial intelligence in June last year, and he talks a lot about a concept of a robotar, a blend between a robot and an avatar, and looking at sentience in AI, so the sentient AI. He came to a conclusion through this that in fact, whereas we now say I think therefore I am, maybe for AI analysis for the future, we need to look at I feel, therefore I am. And therefore, how far are we towards the feeling situation or the sentience within robotics? So he's questioning a lot this area. He's actually talking tonight at the Dana Centre and also this weekend during the exhibition, so you can catch his work there. This is the Robonaut, which he refers to, which is the NASA robot. Actually, I think these pictures are quite funny, and this is the only pictures you can get of it doing these kind of military things. So, which is designed by NASA, and which is, as always with space and military, advanced in its situations, like some of the exhibition Robotville stuff today. And also here are more robotars in a sense, telepresence doctors. Who actually, this one here is doing a kidney punch to actually help the patient off the floor, but the doctor's there with the patient in the room. And telepresence surgery, of course, robotic surgery dealt with through telepresence. So long distance, the expert can be doing your very much specialist possible operation with other doctors dealing with it through robot control from a distance. So, And integrating telepresence into robotics is an area I'm really obviously interested in from my background. The bottom picture here is a Gostai Jazz robot, which is a French robot. They actually talked on a panel with me at Nesta a few months ago around telepresence, and this is a very successful telepresence robot. It's been built to a height which actually just below shoulder. They've realised that makes us feel less threatened. It moves around the office with you, and your colleague at a distance can be with you physically within the space, has a physical aspect, not just as a screen like with Skype or with video conferencing, and can join you in meetings. So obviously it can change to be different colleagues at different points. So the top one actually is a new output, which is researchers in Munich who are looking at telepresence through masks, so projecting 3D image of the telepresent face being received into that room onto the back of a mask, and that I think links into your face motion, so we're actually getting the moving, talking face happening. So a very small little picture here, but you can see this basic projection camera behind. That's where the telepresence is being received into the mask face. There, we'll add this then, the next stage is 2 robot bodies. So, Professor Masaki Fujihata, who has also been part of Robots and Avatars, comes much more from a view that actually the robot only can express the interior information that it contains. So it is but an expression of its creator. And he's looking very clearly from his point of view that until robots learn how to cheat or something, then we've still got a long way to go on this AI side. This is an expression of the interior. This is the LifeNaut Bino 48, which is the robot immortality, where you actually can make a robot of yourself which remains with all its program of you beyond your life. So you can remain with as being a companion with your family or whatever else. So, Dr. David Levy, who's with us tonight in the audience, actually also part of Robots and Avatars discussions, has put out a book called Love and Sex with Robots, which looks very much at this whole area of robots transforming notions of love and sexuality, expanding horizons to actually look at sensuality and pleasurability with highly sophisticated humanoid robots. So there again, coming to a point where the companion becomes a close part of us, something where we are in a touch-feel situation. We're developing intimacy and virtual intuitions together with robotics. So Robots and Avatars moves forward with an exhibition at FACT in March and then on a European tour. And Rory Glynn is one of the new commissions for the work, for the exhibition. He's also here in today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of commissions. Rory is making a kinetic robotic sculpture which actually will be hanging in the foyer at FACT. We're going to hang it. We've made that decision, I think. Which actually we're using Kinect, so we're using motion capture through Kinect, with many people working with Kinect now in commission work, will actually playfully follow you around the space. It's programmed with puppetry movements, but it actually nudges you, follows groups, and it's looking at the extension of architecture, so the archigram notions of responsive architecture, starting to come into the venues we work in, the architectures around us. So robots which actually respond to us as we move towards them, towards a building, starts to give us information we need. Actually, potentially, with migration of data, as Peter's mentioned, also starts to know what we're looking for. So starting to feed data back and forward. And this is an early picture from Body Data Space. This is the Body Data Space Collective, which is the Crawley Robot Building, which was formed by a 7-year-old at the beginning of the project in our school's work, looking at a building which can move around, which actually has got a face like a robot, but has multiple functions around it. So, a second commission that we're working on is with Louis-Philippe Demer, who's a French-Canadian based in Singapore, and he's doing a project called The Blind Robot, looking at the degree of intellectual, emotional and physical engagement generated when a robot touches your face. And here I think we're in a very interesting area of potentially the uncanny valley and where it is at the moment, because I have a feeling the uncanny valley maybe is a moving situation at this point in time, and I'd like to talk more with Peter about that. And Peter's also been part of Robots and Avatars, I need to say that. So Louis is going to be making a robot arm. It may not actually have a whole body with it, but it will be in a space in the gallery where you enter and you sit in front of it, and in that robot hand will feel and touch your face and neck. And as it feels and touches you, it draws a picture behind, as drawing robots do, onto the screen behind you. But here we're looking very much at vulnerability and actually how we deal with the robot touching us. Vivian Woman's also working with Touch with Robots, and us touching robots to actually get them to react. And Louis Philippe's working with them touching us. And I'd like to relate that back into a situation of healthcare and well-being for the future. The fact that actually, as we know, we have a growing older population with less young people to look after us. In Japan already, 14 companies make healthcare and home domestic robots to look after the elderly. So everyone in this room, we may be in a position where at some point in our lives, when we're needing care, there will be a robot there that is dealing with us, touching us and dealing with us in different ways. There's a lot of reportage on this on the Robot and Avatar site if you want to go deeper, with very different experts putting in their feelings around this, and health and well-being and AI. So the last slide to show you is obviously the biomimetic body, and this is this new area of robotics where robots are learning. They're actually learning by watching and interacting with humans. And so they learn like children from the beginning. Their algorithms are taught to actually be generative and learning as they go along. Now, I haven't seen any of these, and maybe other people in the room have got a lot more knowledge on this. I have seen a robot caterpillar learning to actually come out of its cocoon through a very simple generative learning system. So I'll leave it with this one. I'm looking at the representation of the other. So I am a lover yourself, it's an old Inca saying when you say hello. So, and everyone is someone's lover is a very important intercultural identity saying. So finishing with Meet Thy Maker, this is where we're looking at, is dealing with the other and ourselves in representation through robots and avatars. So I hope that's an interesting input to today.
The old person, the kidneys out of my head. But next up, we've got Matt Jones from Berg.
Yes. The comic relief. Possibly. There we go. Hello. How's it going? Shall I speak into this? People of video. Yes, I'm Matt. I'm from Berg. It's 13 people, about half designers, half technologists. We live in a little room in East London and we make things. We make things for ourselves, we make things for other people who pay us money. It's an excellent business model. This is the first robot we did. It's available. You may have seen it before. Don't spoil the surprise for other people. It connects to an IM account, and when you're offline it does that. And yeah, you can guess the rest. You come back. So that was 5 years ago. Still haven't sold it to anybody because it's hard. Disclaimer: I'm not an academic or a robotician or an artist. I'm a designer. This is my favourite quote about making predictions about the future. You mentioned it before when I was talking about these sorts of things. It's also my favourite quote about design, because design is lying or promising if you're being nicer about it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the near future of those sorts of things, robots and AIs. This is probably what pops into people's minds. Olivia mentioned Terminator and other things with sort of red filters in front of their eyes. That seems to be important if you're a robot. This is my favourite one. Usually at this point when I'm giving talks, we sort of recommend that you go and watch Mary Poppins this weekend. I won't do that. I think you should watch this, which is Colossus, the Forbin Project, which is a forerunner of Terminator. Cameron cites it as one of the forerunners. It's brilliant. It's one of that period of who's seen it? Anyone? Oh, 2 people. It's absolutely brilliant. It's that period of like pre-Star Wars 1970s sci-fi where nothing ends well for anybody. It's absolutely brilliant. And there's a bit in the middle, so it's about AI, supercomputers taking over humanity, all of that good stuff. But there's a bit about 2/3 of the way through where it turns into a human AI flat-sharing comedy, as a friend of mine, Kevin Davis, pointed out brilliantly. And this is a still from that point where the AI is pointing out he's mixed a cocktail badly, which I quite like. And of course, here we are. Human AI flat-sharing comedies are mainstream and purchasable in Apple stores right now. Who has Siri? Yeah. Who's managed to make him, her, it do anything useful yet? Okay. Who's seen my video off the internet of swearing in it before? Okay, I'll play it again because it's funny. Let's see. I'll try and beep out the swearing.
We have a flat tire.
How do I tie a bow tie again?
What's the fastest way to Hartford Hospital?
Tell my wife I'm going to be 30 minutes late.
Tell my husband I'm not surprised.
Tell my wife if she has a problem with my work schedule, she's more than welcome to get a job of her own.
Tell my husband that I do just as much work as he does.
Tell my wife that if watching Ellen is a job, she should get a promotion.
Message from your husband. I appreciate you.
Bullshit. What did he actually say?
Please don't drag me into this.
Siri, call my husband.
Siri, ignore the call command.
Tell my husband that he said he'd respect my choice to stay at home with our child.
Tell my wife I would, but she can't even get around to washing his overalls.
Did you want me to search for flower shops nearby?
Tell my husband that at least when I sit on the washing machine,
Send my wife this picture and ask her if the washing machine is
The only thing you've been sitting on lately. Okay.
Ask my husband what he means by that.
Tell my wife I think she knows.
Hey, look. I googled anger management techniques.
Tell my husband to think very carefully before he says whatever he's about to say.
Ask my wife if she's McPherson.
Tell my husband how dare he.
Tell my wife that's not an answer.
Is this my fault?
Tell my husband that I will not answer that.
Ask my wife if she's McPherson.
Searching for a place to hide.
Tell my husband he wishes it was just Jeff McPherson.
I don't want to.
Tell him.
Please don't make me.
Do it.
Send my wife directions to hell.
Say goodbye to the most amazing iPhone yet.
Well, if nothing else, I think I'm getting better at beeping out the swearing. Anyway, companion species. It's all going to be fine. This is the other video I show of kittens on a Roomba to make you like me. But basically, the thing that we've been sort of talking about in the studio for about a year or so is it's really hard to see. It's really hard to see who the you in UI is, who the user in user interface is anymore. This is where it gets good. It's quite hard to make a point when there's kittens on a Roomba. One shall remain. There we are, the kitten defending us all from Roombas. Look at that, brilliant. So, as things, and there's a child and a dog, mess. But as our things get more behaviour in them and more motive and more agency, particularly if we're talking about kind of robots that have kind of the ability to wander around like a Roomba, it's very hard to sort of see who the user is and or who's in charge in a way. And so if you're a designer of UIs or user interfaces or interactions, it's quite a kind of interesting question to keep asking yourself, I think. At least we like keeping asking it. This is a quote from Bertram Meyer, professor of computer science, that I really, really liked, pointed out to me by Carsten Schmidt. Real systems have no top, which you could transpose to kind of, real interfaces have no user in some ways. They kind of all surface. They're all interface. There is no kind of there's no tool or user in this kind of equation. There are kind of actors in a network. I really like this kind of solution back to network theory, which I'll just pick out: a body of allies, human and non-human, through a process of translating their interests to be aligned within the actor network. That feels like the job at hand. That feels what the new kind of design canvas is if you're an interaction designer. I hope this isn't a spoiler for anybody, but I'd like to briefly talk about another film that involves a smuggler, a giant dog, a princess, a farm boy, and his dad. I don't know if you can guess which one that is, but as I say, it's not a spoiler to point out it's his dad.
I suppose you're programmed for etiquette and protocol.
Protocol? Why, it's my primary function, sir. I am well versed in all the customs.
I have no need for a protocol.
Of course you have, sir. Not in an environment such as this. That is why I have been programmed.
What I really need is a droid who understands the binary language of moisture evaporators.
Evaporators? Sir, my first job was programming binary localators, very similar to evaporators in this respect.
Can you speak Bachi?
Of course I can, sir. It's like a second language to me. I'm
Alright, shut up, I'll take this. Shut up.
This is the point I'm always just tempted to just watch Star Wars with you. But about a year ago, I became like obsessed with this scene because it's so deeply weird. It's from my child, you know, I mentioned C3PO before, but you know, it has a big effect on me as a child as I watched it. But I became obsessed with coming back to this scene. It's so odd, right? If you look at it from now, it's so bloody weird because they're lined up like slaves or like livestock, but they're also dressed as peers, and they're like tools, and they can do things, and they have capabilities, they talk about what they can do, and R2 whistles and beeps, and somehow Luke can understand him, and it's just so weird. You just watch it over and over, which I have done for about a year. Anything becomes weird, I suppose. But it's just a really affecting scene. I was talking to Tom Igo, who some of you might know from ITP in New York, and he pointed out to me that it's also because the only point in the films, the whole arc of the films, where the droids actually seem happy. They seem sort of like happy about what's about to happen. They seem like at home with it all, you know, very sort of used to being like, you know, nicked by Jawas and sold and just, you know, hanging out and saying, yeah, I'm brilliant at bocce, what do you want? So I come back to this about this kind of like weird relationship that we might have with things that have a bit of motive and behaviour and agency within them and how we relate to them. But ultimately it's men in tin suits, right? This is great, this is worth watching. This is Kenny Baker drinking a cup of tea while he's in R2-D2. We'll just watch this again, it's brilliant. Hey! And, you know, which brings us back to, you know, the real sort of material you have to work with as an interaction designer, which is our stupid brains, which has been pointed out by others this evening. That's the pedal of my bike. It's also a dog, isn't it? Look at it. And it's this kind of really just underhand trickery that we like to use as designers, which I think is really worth pursuing. I often think about the Apple Newton versus the Palm Pilot. The Apple Newton, of course, had brilliant, clever handwriting recognition, and the Palm Pilot relied on the fact that this is far cleverer and can be kind of brute forced into learning. And so you learned graffiti, you learned a new symbolic language, and then it worked perfectly, and you're somehow more grateful to the clever thing. So one of the things that we talk about a little bit in the studio is rather than pursuing artificial intelligence, pursuing artificial empathy, which actually came out of a conversation and a talk that Alex gave a while back, so thank you for booting me up the arse on that one. Big dog. I've shown this before. Who looks at this when this happens and just thinks, you bastard, don't kick Big Dog. Oh, I mean, it's because it's got all of the mappings and behaviours of what we recognise from something that's sort of alive. It's so easy to fool. So, you know, let's keep fooling ourselves, I guess. Of course, you know, Big Dog is an imperial military killing machine. Like Star Wars. This is one of my favourite projects, Sticky Light from the University of Tokyo, I think it is. So simple. I mean, in terms of like fooling us that something's alive, this is a light and a mirror and a bit of logic. I won't show all of it, but it's just this playful companion light which just wanders around and reacts to things. And the amount we will project into something has a little bit of agency and a little bit of motive. I think motive is probably more important in some ways than intelligence in these areas. And there's this bit here where it follows it around, and then of course you start to play with it, and our instinct to play is what brings us into these realms. And just wait for this to happen, because it's really lovely. He keeps painting, and then he decides to trap it. Okay, there we are. Anyway, watch that on YouTube, it's brilliant. This is kind of turning into you being framed with AI. So, Uncanny Valley, drink! So I don't need to talk about that. But that's effectively, it's been explained, but that's the sort of visceral exploration. So our kind of thing, I guess, is as Peter said, is don't bother. You know, I think Ghislaine is really smart to say that this is a moving it's a moving feast, and braver and more brilliant people than us will terraform the uncanny valley eventually, and good on them. But we're going to stay over there and try and do this, because it's just easier, and it's still really, really hard. Another favourite quote of ours, Rodney Brooks, Robotition MIT, etc. 50 of the smartest people in the world for 50 years locked in a room would be very, very lucky if we can make them as smart as a puppy. That's the goal. Make them as smart as a puppy. That's all we have to do. Of course, puppies got that way through brute force of emotion, and brute forcing us emotionally, if you like, over about 30,000 years or so. But and that's the kind of moving valley, I guess. Is really, really interested to learn more about what Lirec are doing with dog ethnographers. Ethnologists. Eggnog? Okay, anyway, moves on. So another one of my favourite bits of the craziness around this and our stupid brains. This is a study from 2003 about IBO, and 75% of people who responded to the survey said, yeah, it's a gadget, it's a thing. I have to plug it in. It's like, I know it's not real, except it is real. It's got I love it, I love IBO. He's lovely. And I understand that there's a being with an inner mental life. You're always thinking about little robot rabbits, bless him, all the rest of it. And so people are holding two contradictory ideas in their mind, at least kind of 60, the overlap of that 75% and the 60%, I can't do the maths or statistics, which is why I'm not an academic. But there are people holding those two contradictory ideas in their mind at the same time. Brilliant. I mean, that's where we're going to be. We're going to be in that messy kind of foothill before the valley, I think, for a long, long time. I love this video. You may have seen me show, again, you've been afraid of robots. But look at this is brilliant. Look at that. Playing with the robot. Playing with the robot. Don't need the human anymore. Play with each other. That's all right. That's good. Don't really need to say this to this crowd, I guess, but we're kind of interested in this idea of companion species as well, but pursuing it through design interventions, I guess. I really, really want to get my hands on Lirec stuff. Because I haven't got that yet. I'm reading science fiction. This is my favourite bit of science fiction in this domain at the moment. It's a very short story by Ted Chiang. It's lovely, and it raises lots of lovely paradoxes in the same way as what IBO research does. Here's some of our own work about kind of things that might kind of point out the limitations and opportunities of companion species. This is something we call text camera, which is basically a camera reporting what it sees but in text and asking questions about it. So this is reporting what its sensors can do. So it can tell it's indoors because it has a sensor to adjust the auto exposure, which is based upon detecting whether it can sort of sniff tungsten light or strip lighting or sky. So it can make an inference then. It's very, very simple, but it's just a lovely kind of simple step towards kind of relating to what your companion species senses are, if you like. This is another sketch, currently apparently runner-up in an online poll about design fiction. I think if you're a runner-up in design fiction, does that mean it's more real? I don't know. Anyway, this is a clock for public spaces where robots see one piece of data and humans see another piece of data that they can relate to. And just this idea of like these clocks, these objects which are for different sensoriums but in the same place, and what that might do to kind of talk about relationships between you and kind of companions. And then finally this week. We've been making a thing for about 2.5 years actually, but we just announced a product that we're making, a platform that we're making called BirdCloud, and the first product on BirdCloud is Little Printer. This is an old prototype. Yeah. This is him. So we're trying to make, I guess, kind of companion species that bridge between the kind of spirit world of the internet and the world of the home, get invited into the home, and in some ways kind of brute force you a little bit and try and be as appealing and hopefully as smart as other companion species that we invite into our home. But that's going to take a while, as Ronnie Brooks says, but it's possible to start now. So that's kind of me. Thanks.
Imagination or ink to turn a little printer into a little Hitler.
Don't listen to what Danny Lincoln said.
Next up, we've got Dan O'Halloran. Are we going to need to do a swap?
That's the Godwin's law of you've just breached.
Okay, so hi, my name's Dan O'Halloran. And I hope you'll forgive me for my somewhat robotic delivery, perhaps, today. I've been on 3 continents in as many days, and I don't know what time zone I'm in, and that might have an uncanny valley effect on my own presentation. I come at this issue as a philosopher. I'm interested in the evolution of technology and the issue of design, and I want to begin by raising one question about whether technology evolves or is designed by humans. Because I think this question acts as a prism through which to view all the other questions that we're raising today about robots. My position about technology is that technology is actually a body of knowledge, not a set of gadgets. And as such, we need to distinguish between the ways in which ideas are evolved and the forces that act upon the material expressions of those ideas, such as robots. In this context, it's futile to talk about robots or any other technological gadget as a solution to a human problem. We need to understand the drivers behind novelty before we start fantasizing about future robots and their uses. Necessity, from this point of view, is not the mother of invention. Invention is the mother of necessity. And we will simply have to get used to the robots we get. I'd suggest that we increase the range of possible definitions of robots, including, as Libby was mentioning at the beginning, bots. I'm firmly on the algorithmic side of definitions here. Some of you may have seen Kevin Slavin's excellent video of his TED Talk, in which he talks about the Wall Street algorithms, which constitute at present 70% of the New York stock market's activities. These algorithms are actually only one kind of robot, inhabiting a whole robotic infosphere within which we also live to a certain extent. And that infosphere has real-life effects far beyond anyone's understanding. Think, for example, about these Wall Street robots, these algorithms, and then have a think about where your pension went. Current robots are in fact losing their biomorphic forms, never mind the anthropomorphic ones we've seen most often and which you've seen at the Science Museum mostly today. Real functional robots are shifting away from metal and towards oil and water. They're shifting away from silicon and towards silicone. We're moving towards foam robots. We're moving towards invertebrate robots made out of rubber. We're moving towards programmable chemical gel robots. And this is an example from Waseda University in Japan. This is actually microscopic. You would not be able to see this, it's a prototype, but they've made it work and it can scale up. In fact, to put robots and these developments within a much wider frame, there's a series of parallel developments bubbling away merrily at the moment, moving towards a conversion of the arts and sciences in what I think will be the greatest phase change of our era. And this phase change is towards the creation of life. or what looks like and behaves like life. As the philosopher Daniel Dennett has said, we humans, we're robots, made of robots, made of robots, made of robots. You've got billions, several hundred billion probably, cell neurons in your brain. Each one of those neurons is a eukaryotic cell with nucleus and with mitochondria, and it's a direct descendant of free-swimming, free-living, autonomous, little single-celled organisms that have been around for billions of years. And if you look inside each neuron, you find that there are motor proteins in there. Little motor proteins are certainly a robot. It's not alive. It's a bit of nanoengineering that does all sorts of interesting work. It's mindless, and that's what we're made of. So, if, from a certain philosophical point of view, humans are made of robots, what does that mean for those people who are engineering the most elementary building blocks of life in order to create robots? What does it mean if the robots they create look and behave like life? Maybe the question then should not be, what do we want robots to look and behave like? But what are these new life forms we are creating? And here I want to turn to 3 examples of people working in this area. First, from the living architecture movement. Francois Roche, French architect, machines for making buildings. He makes machines that grow buildings without involving human design. Francois basically designs these machines which actually look like those huge articulated kind of octopus arms in the film The Matrix, which use dynamic feedback from each other's movements to determine the forms in which they pour a wet building which then hardens into existence. And this is an example of one of his machine-made buildings which he did not design. The machines designed it. The robots designed it. Rachel Armstrong, who some of you may know, working in synthetic biology. Rachel has come up with things she calls proto-cells. And these are artificial cells that can be chemically programmed to self-assemble and perform specific tasks, such as a paint that can eat carbon dioxide. It's a living technology that could, as Rachel proposes in the future, grow reefs to shore up the foundations of the slowly sinking city of Venice. And lastly, another example some of you may know, the artist Daisy Ginsburg. Daisy has produced genetically engineered bacteria that can pigment themselves, sensing, for example, the presence of toxins in water. And these are her, these are pigmented turds. What all these artists, scientists, and I want to know that these are people working in laboratories, they're working in some kind of strange new intersection between the arts and the sciences. What all these people are doing is leveraging evolutionary mechanisms, taking control of the means of production of life itself. I'm working at the moment with a company called Filter Factory, who are making what I could consider to be another kind of artificial life form called weavers. And what I want to move on to here is this embodiment issue. Most people assume a robot is the mechanical bits and pieces that give the robot form. But weavers are a good example of an algorithmic robot, like Wall Street robots, that feeds off human activity streams and produces an emergent personality from those streams. In other words, we don't design the personality. We call these beings, as a category, infomorphs, because whilst they are robots of a kind, they're not recognizably robots. Their physical form, such as it is determined by and consists of information alone. I'll come back to that in a minute. What they do, what weavers do, is they consume social media streams and they produce their own blogs. They tweet about photographs and videos and objects they find. They can tell stories about their lives. They can hold a chat conversation with you. They're even geolocated, and they check in, maintaining a map of their movements. And if you use the augmented reality app Layar, you can see them around you, follow them about town, and explore reality with them. Marcus Brown has written about weavers, and he says this about them: I'm feeding my own persona into the weaver's system and mapping out my own personal history. The weavers post, tweet, listen to music, check into places, and learn new skills. I'm currently running a series of 40-year-old versions of myself that live in Munich. Well, I too have an alter ego, Finn, and I live in Rio, but I only moved there in August. A couple of months before I moved there, I made Finn, and Finn lives in Rio. He's interested in the same kind of things I am. And he was kind of like an advanced reconnaissance team, spotting the things, the bars that I'd like, the places I want to go, the museums that I'd be interested in. He's been hanging out a lot at the Casa Cultura do Digital. He's my alter ego. He also likes to spend most of his time by the pool in my house, either that or on the beach in Copacabana. And here, what you're looking at is a still I took from Layar when I happened to come home and find him lounging by the pool. So, what if we consider first and foremost the issue of robot personality, of mind, even perhaps, dodgy area, of soul, before we consider the embodiment issue? Here's where I hope that everyone in the audience is of legal age, because I want to raise what I consider the most likely area for advance in this field as being not military or the health industry, but the sex industry. The sex industry being the only people, along with the military and terrorism analysts and intelligence services, who still find the prefix cyber cool. This is a vibrator made by a company called Jeju. It's an oral vibrator. This little node here is a tongue. And it learns from your reactions. Obviously, I'm only speaking to half of the audience. Yep, you get where I'm going. It learns from your reactions and produces a set of patterns to correspond ever more closely to your personal path to orgasm. Is this a robot? Well, I would say no, not yet. Not until it's got 1, a personality, and 2, is networked. Imagine, for example, placing a personality inside this lingual robot so that it could also give you verbal feedback. Imagine putting the personality of George Clooney in it, for example. I suspect, therefore, that the first industry to make use of, going back to those robots I showed you before, the wet robots, the wetware that I've shown you earlier, the chemical gel, the rubber, the invertebrate robots, will be probably the Japanese sex industry. What we're looking at in the immediate future is a future of intelligent chemical jelly robot vibrators, all of whom have personalities of their own, are networked, and exchange information about themselves, and perhaps even their owners. So, having kind of thrown a spanner in the works a little bit there, and having actually put my hand up and said, well, okay, I'm going to risk making a prediction, which is always a dangerous business, I'll stop and thank you and let it take over.
Come and do the panel discussion. I've got a few questions prepared for the panel first, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So get thinking on those. Do I need to use this? Okay. So, my first question is that we've seen dots of light, we've seen avatars, we've seen banking algorithms, we've seen programmable gels, robots that punch people in the kidneys, robots that let kittens ride on them, genetically engineered bacteria, infomorphs, and sex robots. I'm still not entirely clear what a robot is, and I was hoping that I could go through each of the panel and get you to define what a robot is for you. Over to
I'll
you.
start. All of the above. I'm not prejudiced. I think that it's within certain communities. I think that there are different kind of focuses as to what the term robot carries, but I think that is very much to do with a shorthand, particularly in science, that tends to arise where, since you're dealing with kind of concepts, having a kind of jargon for that carries across. So those people who work in very kind of a mechanical robot building would have a very defined notion of what that was that maybe wouldn't necessarily tend to things like spider bots and so on. And certainly the vibrator robot, which I think arguably could be a robot, is an area that most of them wouldn't think about. So I don't think necessarily having a definition of what a robot is necessarily useful unless it's within a field where it's a useful kind of shorthand for these are the sorts of things we're working on. My fault. Avoiding answering the question.
Dan, you've portrayed your vision of a robot. If you could summarise it.
Yeah, I don't see robots as being confined to the world of objects or devices. I think that we have to consider that we go beyond that level of thinking of them as belonging to technology as gadgets. Furthermore, I can't come up with a kind of firm ontological category in which they belong. But I can say that they ought to display behaviour and that they ought to be made.
Okay.
And that's about as far as I'm willing to go.
Fair enough. Guylaine?
I think we have got a problem because it's a generic term now. And I think it's good to hear the different words coming with bot on the end and actually the different add-ons, because you say the word robot and it's got an attachment to it different in everyone's head, but actually probably quite old-fashioned attachment to it. So I think probably moving into a wider range of words, maybe we've got on the end of all of them, but maybe with companion or whatever come into it. So for me, I think I'm probably more Dan in terms of actually looking at how data moves. So whether it's given data or gathered data or your own personal data or someone else's, how that moves between from the physical to the virtual, back to the physical, back to the virtual again, that kind of blending, that flow. But whether it's through virtual or object or physical, I don't think it really matters. I think it's actually how we need it and what we use it for and how it complements us in our everyday lives.
Thanks, Ben. I actually really liked yours.
Oh, really?
I really like the Halloween test. But like over every Halloween for like the next 100 years, like a moving uncanny valley. It's like, you know, will you know if a little kid knocks and is dressed up as a jelly vibrator, but they're a robot. I think the Halloween test is good, but I think previously I'd sort of thought it was the same as murder, which is means, motive, and opportunity. It's kind of means being how it, which is to the point it can be data or embodied and get around and have agency. Motive, which I think is probably the thing it's most important, but the thing I'm most fascinated with is does motive give rise to behaviour, and opportunity, kind of that it gets invited in or is sort of integrated either as a companion or as just a bit of furniture or a bit of something that lives in your life.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my personal, I don't know, triangulation of it. But I like the Halloween test.
Okay.
That's my new one.
Now, another thing that kind of came up in a lot of your presentations, if not all of them, was this idea of the uncanny valley, and I think most of you agreed that it was important to kind of avoid the area, creating things that look too human. However, there are a lot of roboticists who are and animators who are really striving to achieve that, that perfect human look and missing the mark. Why is that? Why are people so obsessed with creating ourselves? I guess recreating. I don't know who's that for.
I think I quite like the idea tonight that's come up from these three in a way, that there are many brave souls and there'll be more brave souls who are just storming the uncanny valley, and eventually it'll be a very sort of quaint idea. I mean, it's important to me because I'm a commercial designer, so I want it to appeal to people.
And that's so many Halloween costumes.
Yes,
well,
the Halloween costumes.
Yeah. And there's quite a lot of zombie acceptance now, it seems. So it may all just be completely invalid, but I quite like the idea of just people that, as Dan said, we're going to get what we get, and we'll sort of change. And I think, as Zane said, it's a movable feast culturally. So
does anyone see any value in creating humanoid robots, or highly realistic humanoid robots, or should we just completely abandon that and go in another direction altogether?
I suppose one of the arguments from that point of view is that the human body is particularly well adapted for living life on planet Earth, and we've built the environment around us to actually accommodate that particular body, so bipedal motion, the opposable thumb, therefore potentially it makes it easier in that way. I also think there's something intrinsic within that quest to try and create a perfect human type replica that's probably something that's fairly heavily rooted in the human psyche, but by no means, as we've seen already, robots are much broader than that, and that's actually a very hard challenge to set yourself. And it's not necessarily one certainly we felt in was need to do, but I think there's something hardwired, and the Germanoids project is
terrifying.
A bit, producing copies of your daughter. There's a deep psychology there, I think, to do with breeding and passing on your genes or your memes or whatever to the next generation in a robot clone.
I can see the point in that, because as humans we're obsessed with imitating things, and when you imitate one thing in another medium that's not proper to that thing, you get interesting emergent properties. But on the other hand, if we're talking about kind of leveraging the evolutionary success of the human body, after all, every single one of us is the product of millions of years of evolutionary success. There's a flip side to that, which is that nature also has to live with its mistakes. And we're not really, in copying the human body, able to do anything truly revolutionary, because we can't start bottom up. We've got a template and we're merely copying it. So we can produce emergent effects that are a product of imitation, but what we can't do is produce true novelty.
I think in a kind of bigger mass public, the humanoid robot, or the emotive reaction to the face, just two eyes and a nose and a mouth, is going to be still very important. And I think we will see, in the group work I've done on this, usually a group will split in half, and half the group will go, I don't need it to look like a human, and the other half will go, but I really want to feel for it and look at it and have an emotive reaction. And I think we will see, particularly in care robots and that area, when it goes more mass manufacture, there will be some type of reaction for yourself in an emotive way. And if we look at things like Tamagotchi, where children, to look after something, it's this whole companion role. It has, in a way, they're looking at it's a two-way conduit. It's not just about it looking after us, it being our companion. It's very much finding a way to be its companion too. So I think we've still got a long way to go on that, and it may be, but this is again why we have to have maybe some more words for all of this, because it's going to be a wide different gradient of emergent types. Yeah.
And what about science fiction? A lot of people have also made reference to robots that we've seen in science fiction. is that a help or a hindrance for roboticists? Are we kind of looking to copy things from science fiction, or is it just showing the misgivings of the machines we've made so far, or robots we've made so far?
Certainly for us as actual builders of robots, it's both a help and a hindrance. It's a help in that within technology and technology development, they are our equivalent of the dinosaurs. I mean, biology has got dinosaurs. People always want to go and see dinosaurs, but with us, if you've got a robot, people are interested in robots because there's a cultural fascination that goes back. But that cultural fascination is clearly built on a series of narratives and stories in which the robots have had abilities that are far beyond what they can have at the moment, but also are always very strong within those narratives. They're never just as kind of side issues. They're either the heroes or more, especially the kind of villains in there. And so I think that gives a very strong emotional element to it. I think that comes back to what you were saying about that emotional link, particularly if a humanoid robot looks like a humanoid robot, then it looked like an evil humanoid robot. And yet when you look at the Forbin project, for example, it's one of my favourite films from way back. It is an interesting, a bleak ending, I'm giving it away there, but nevertheless actually a very interesting idea, this kind of ubiquitous, almost kind of, Gordon Brittis of the artificial intelligence world. It's not necessarily being evil, it's trying to help us become better people, and in so kind of nannies us to whatever happens at the end of the film. So that mixture of ideas is potent, it's useful, but what I'm hoping that science fiction writers and developers will do, and beginning to see start of this, is to take some of these new weird ideas of what robots might look like in the future, and not just stick to the standard, or humanoid robot, right? The kind of copy-paste kind of thing that's going on there. Because as scientists, we're always looking for new ideas. We do read, we go to the movies, we watch telly, that kind of stuff. And certainly a lot of people who work in the robotics field, particularly in the Lirec project, were inspired to do that because of robots that they've been part of their kind of childhood and part of their cultures they're bringing up. So I think it's important to have science fiction coming up with new ideas of what this might be without necessarily retreading old tracks.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. But I'd say not just science fiction, I'd say fiction, full stop.
Yes.
Fiction in the widest sense. There has been, for me, a problem with the Hollywood kind of narrative over the past 40 years, because Hollywood has acted as kind of cultural ambassador for the development of American military and other technologies within a frame of a consumer society. And it's hard to forget that kind of narrows the filter of their possibilities and actually strangles imagination. The sci-fi writers who work on Hollywood films are working within a template as constrained as people who work writing those kind of porn novels you see on the top shelf of airport newsstands. So how do we break out of that? Well, we start thinking of kind of going mainstream. And this is where I'm considering that the broadening of definitions of robots actually smuggles these robots into fiction more generally as they seep into society. If you've got, a novelist writing a kind of conspiracy thriller about Wall Street, kind of a high-octane financial thriller, well, in the future they're going to have to write about those algorithms. What are they writing about then? Are they writing sci-fi? Is it that kind of sci-fi that is about our present, as it always has been? I think so.
And Dan, you obviously think that it might be you said Japanese sex industry that might be the driver of robots, or the robot industry in general. I was wondering what everyone else thought, where are robots going to kind of add the most value or sell the most? We've already got, robot hoovers and we've got military robots, but I wanted to ask you where you think we're going to see the most growth for robots.
I'll start. As somebody who shares a home with a Roomba, I'm well aware of its limitations, shall we say, but also its cuteness, and I think that's part and parcel of it, though I suspect I may be the first person who'll actually be killed by a Roomba, because it always seems to come into the kitchen when I'm transferring a pot of boiling water with pasta in it.
Do you find yourself tidying up before as it moves around the room?
Yes, because otherwise it gets caught in the curtains and gives out that "help, I'm trapped in the curtains" little song in there. But I felt as a research project, we were developing intelligent artifacts. What was it like to live with one of them? And it's sweet but infuriating. And I think that the kinds of ideas of people using robots, artificial intelligence in domestic situations is actually extremely tricky, because if you look at the tedious, mundane sort of things that people would love to have a robot for, things like ironing clothes with them, that is technically extremely complex to do. So I'm not sure if necessarily you're going to develop it through those kinds of drivers. The toy market is different, and we've already seen things like Clio and a range of other things. We mentioned Tamagotchis earlier, that there's a way of kind of driving forward in there, and certainly that's one of the areas where we've had some interest in the Lirec project, is in the kind of toy market and the entertainment market. And that entertainment market then blends seamlessly into the other kinds of entertainment market that we respected professors of computer science never talk about, but do think about, because I do genuinely believe that whole, the drivers, I mean, one of the things that made the web the web it was is because of sex. And it's an absolutely profound driver for human need, and I suspect you're beginning to see some devices, teledildonics, I think is the proper technical name for the field, and I suspect that you will start to see that as a driver for a kind of, given the prudishness of society, kind of robots under the counter in paper bags kind of mentality to begin with.
That's a lovely idea.
Big bags.
That would make them kind of doubly sexy.
Doubly sexy. We should make that.
I'm so tempted to say the uncanny valley, but
You did.
I did, yeah. I obviously think that there's a massive market in tiny printers.
It's a printer and it's tiny.
Yeah, and it's got a face on it.
It's got a face on it.
So, that's nailed my colours to the mast. Yeah, I mean, I think the question to define what a robot is kind of, the answer that's come back from this panel is that it's a mess, and it's going to be everywhere, and it's going, as Dan said, it's going to be the robots we get will be the robots we get, and they're going to be so. It's going to be things with motive and opportunity and means in them, which is going to be all sorts of things. It's going to be software, and it's going to be hardware, and it's going to be domestic, and it's going to be in your garden, and it's going to be in your workplace. It's such a. It's almost like we can put the term to bed in some ways, because it's going to become like cyber. Is it robotic? It is. It just is. That's my terrible non-answer.
Well, I've talked about health and well-being.
Yeah.
That's definitely a huge growing area. And I think also, I mean, as we all know, robots are used massively in industry. I mean, I think we can't underestimate how many robots are in use already. I think quite stunningly, countries like Italy have got millions of robots in use in industry and production and manufacture. So, but health and well-being is a huge growth area. And that links into, as I mentioned, about the Japanese, where there's a lot of concern about having to move away from your elderly parents for work, etc., and having care, robotics. In a way, I think the robot house that you mentioned is, the Lirec project is in this too, where you can stay in touch with and know what is happening for your elderly relatives, whether they need to know noodles in the morning, whether they need help, how they're feeling, and care assistance, etc. there. So, and I think the other thing, just coming back to the sci-fi point, I think we shouldn't actually too quickly dismiss sci-fi. I've grown up with sci-fi, mum and dad, so but I know there's a lot of studies being done, and a particularly interesting woman, M. Catherine Hale, who's actually a literature expert who looks at sci-fi and analyses its results into real world and actually what the predictions have been through. And she's and others have come through. Of course, not all sci-fi becomes real, but actually quite a large percentage of it does. 10 to 20, 30 years before something starts to move, kick and push ideas. So if you think about things like Neil Stephenson with the Diamond Age, that's got lots of little bots in it and lots of little different ways of thinking about the bot. It's not just a one-way thinking on it. So, and the sex industry, of course, and I think in South Korea there is already many houses, prostitution houses, where they're just robots for prostitutes already. So, but we've got several people here with more knowledge on that. David Levy here, I think, could fill us in on more up-to-date details as well. So.
I've got one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. Oh, sorry, are you about to?
No.
No. And then I'm going to open up to the audience. This is something that came up in a panel that I was moderating last week about connected vehicles and autonomous cars, and they were saying that it's already possible to have cars that can drive completely autonomously. However, the car companies, they were saying that the problem was that the kind of insuring those cars, like no longer are you responsible for driving your car, BMW is responsible for your car, and there was this kind of weird grey area of who's responsible. Obviously BMW would be responsible if there was a failure in the electronics, but normally it's driver error that causes accidents. So I wanted to ask, if a robot, and we're talking kind of physical robot here presumably, makes a mistake, potentially a fatal mistake or a really damaging mistake, who's held accountable? Is it the owner, is it the maker, or is it the robot?
It's a very interesting question, and it is an area where yet the law has to kind of catch up with that. Like a lot of areas around new modern digital technologies, the law tends to move quite slowly in there, and I suspect that what you'll end up with is a number of kind of test cases that will need to be decided on. But it's a question that I've asked a couple of lawyers, and they've kind of gone, it's an interesting question.
So I'll have to charge you for that.
Oh, exactly.
Dan, have you got anything up?
Yeah, I don't think the robots are ever going to put lawyers out of business. I think we're stuck with human lawyers, human law. Yeah, I agree with Peter. I think it's an area where legislation has to catch up, but I think it always has been an area where legislation has had to catch up with developments in technology. And there's certainly, as you all know at present, this kind of financial crisis, which, one of the drivers behind it is automation. What are we going to do legally about that? Who is responsible? How do we attribute responsibility when most of those trades were automated trades? That's one of the problems right now. And we're not talking about a robot future. We're talking about the recent past.
The robo-recession.
For me, this comes into the whole area of behaviours and ethics. So it links into actually how we deal not just with robotics, but also in avatars and virtual worlds. And these questions come up a lot, like the story I heard from one virtual world trainer, where having set up the virtual training session, the CEO of the company in avatar form got in a little virtual car and actually ran over and killed all of his employees within the training session. So it's like, luckily that's an avatar, not a robotic version, but So we are in a new debate about that whole behaviours and ethics in virtual worlds. We do a lot of this work into schools actually, with identity discussion, etc. And I think we obviously that also does relate to robots, but it is so slow. I think everything. I mean, we're still trying to work out the difference, the balance between IP and open source and Creative Commons. Yeah, and I'm stunned, but that is still not. And everybody keeps blanking over about it like this. All government officials just go turn off as soon as you mention. Actually these things have got to be sorted out. It's like I think we're a long way from it, but maintaining good behaviour and ethics, or your, even maintaining your virtual identity in a positive way, or your robotic identity in a positive way, is already part of most people's lives. Yeah, how you maintain what you process. I think the Weave project links into that too. Actually, how you have different identities, and multi-identities, but how you keep those going is kind of fictional or semi-fictional or real you. So yeah, there's a lot to still come through on that. We'll see the first cases, as we have with things like people being imprisoned for inciting riot on Facebook. These kind of things you just can't quite believe, because they did a Facebook message, they've gone to prison for 4 months, so.
And is Little Printer going to be
It's fully as
unleashing
above
hell?
3 laws compliant, I can proudly say. It's tricky. We have to get CE certification for it. But my favourite disclaimer from the world of commerce and design is on computer games, on video games, particularly sort of massively multiplayer ones. And it's that PEGI warning that says, gameplay experience may change over time and as others join. And it's just like so broad and brilliant. And it says nothing, oh right, okay. And it's, I don't know, it's too early to say whether CE certification is going to have to include stuff which starts to accommodate changes in behaviour in terms of what's inhabiting a piece of consumer electronics, possibly. I don't know, it's never going to go as fast as people can invent it, as everybody's just said, so we'll watch it and catch up, and there are smart folks who are talking to various transnational and national bodies to ensure that it slowly catches up, I'm sure.
Wonderful, thank you. And I wanted to open it up to the audience. Have we got any questions here? Yes, do we need to give the mic over? Can I give a seat?
All right, it's working. Yeah, my question is, we're looking at fighting this novelty effects and trying to come up with things like companion design. But I mean, why should we treat robots like any differently than any other technology? We have like disposable iPhones, and the new one comes out and you get a new one. So why should robots be, emotional? I mean, if my Roomba isn't cleaning my floor, I'll just throw it away and get a new one. So why doesn't that apply to all robots and all technology in general?
I'll just make a brief comment on that. There's some studies done on Roomba, and when Roomba occasionally breaks down and they've actually sent it in to be repaired, they have been specific that they want their Roomba back. That it's not just any Roomba, but it's their Roomba, and they kind of mark it so they can ensure it's the right robot that comes back. And we were discussing earlier Michelle's Macintosh. It's getting a little bit old. Been with you for a while. You love it, but a time will come, probably quite soon, when you'll need to get another one. So my feeling is that within the context of looking at robots as tools, then in the same way that when you have a car, you can love that car, but eventually a new model will come along and you'll trade up for it in the same way that you can often in human relationships. You can continue to remain with your laptop and suffer as it falls into decrepitude, or you can trade up and go to another element. So I don't think that necessarily it's a kind of new mentality. I think people get very bonded to the technologies that they have at present. Anyone else?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is why we need new definitions. This, for me, is why I prefer the term infomorph. It seems to cover more of the sense of a robot consisting not of its component parts and their assembly, but some kind of, dare I say it, spiritual element, a personality or a soul or a mind or whatever have you, the way it expresses itself. And I think Tiny Printer is a good example here. If I ask myself, is Tiny Printer a robot? Well, what kind of questions can I ask of it to convince myself that it is? And the question I've come up with tonight is, can I kill it? In any meaningful way? In other words, what is the robotic part? Is it merely the articulated arms, the movement? Or is it, as Matt says, the motives, the agency behind it, what I would call the infomorphic elements? And those are transplantable. It's a little bit like the origins of the term infomorph, which comes from an early cyberpunk novel by Charles Platt called The Silicon Man. And infomorph was his term for uploaded consciousnesses. When a brain was scanned, uploaded into the infosphere or whatever, and you wait for 50 years until the technology catches up, and then you can download into a newly developed body. Well, we may not be able to do that with our own minds, but clearly we can do it with robots or with robot personalities. The question then becomes, what is the bit that has legal or moral identity? And it's certainly not the bits and pieces, the material. Yeah.
Just talking about him, I mean, the thing about as a deeply shallow, evil, and commercially minded designer, I want people to want to desire to buy the things that we design and make. But then also, I have sort of slightly hippie tendencies at times if you corner me after a couple of beers. And one of the things that I think is kind of quite good in a way is what you're discussing. I've lost you. Which is what Dan's describing, is in a way the carcass, the shell of it can be updated and can have a longer design life in some ways. So then you make different choices about what you design, and you make something which is perhaps a bit more precious or a bit more durable, perhaps a bit more premium. But then you can be changing the infomorph within it and extending its design life, which is probably quite a good thing. And commercially, you can be charging for the software updates, as we know as well. There's models there, as well as charging for the metal and the plastic and all of the other materials. So I sort of see it as sort of an opportunity to make some interesting new business models, and also do something that's slightly more responsible. I won't claim that it's terribly responsible, but it just means that you can make different design choices, which is ultimately what I'm interested in.
I mean, I agree with that. I think this phrase migration's good. I love it. I love it that you can migrate all your its and yours memory and information and take it where you want and put it back into maybe something similar or something totally different, like you've been talking about. So.
Can I just come back on one point there? This is an interesting case of a philosophy which we now deem redundant and inaccurate, Cartesianism, the mind-body split dualism. And we've deemed it redundant because we now consider that is simply not an adequate account of the relation between body and mind, what we name body and mind within human beings. But oddly, that Cartesianism is going to experience a new life because it is going to be accurate. Indeed, it is an accurate account of the relation between, as Matt puts it, robots and infomorphs, if these two are mind and body.
Things that are not true but useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, not true of us, but true of something we make.
So have we got any more questions? Here we go.
Thank you. I'm very interested in this point that was raised a little while ago about the legal liability of robots. I've done some research on this, and from what I could find, what there has been in the literature written by lawyers has simply raised the problems, explained the problems in very clear detail, but without coming with any solution. I mean, the problem, if a robot in the street hits you, who is legally liable? Is it the owner of the robot, the designer, the manufacturer, the programmer, the shop? It's a massive problem. And last week at the International Conference on Social Robotics, a young American lady who's a student at Oxford gave a paper raising yet another problem in this area. What happens if you fall in love with your sex robot and it breaks up your marriage? Does your spouse, does your wife have the right to sue the robot itself or the manufacturer or the designer, whatever, for what she calls a heart-born tort or something, clearly an American expression. It turns out that in large parts of the States, or maybe the whole of the States, you can actually sue somebody for breaking up your marriage. So there are social problems as well as normal practical problems like being hit or being involved in an accident. Now, I actually gave a paper on this subject at a conference in June in Germany, and I came up with what I think is a way to solve it, and I'd like the panel to comment on whether or not they think this is a good idea or complete rubbish. My idea is that if in the future, when robots become pervasive, if you buy a robot, it comes with an insurance policy. If you want to use your robot, continue using it after, say, 1 year, you are obligated, legally obligated, to renew your insurance, otherwise the robot stops working. It's automatically turned off by some computer in the cloud. So it would be just like having a car. You're legally obliged to have insurance to cover you for all possible eventualities, for all damage you can do to other people as a result of this robot. Isn't that far simpler and more practical than having the possibility of legislation which will create a billion new lawyers, and the billion new lawyers will be needed to deal with all these cases, but people won't be able to afford to pay for them. So isn't insurance a better answer?
Well, that's a long question.
Long question.
Who wants to take this first?
I'll just say a very, very brief something. I think it's interesting, having discussed with lawyers. Lawyers, being a lawyer is all about taking one set of information, parsing it through a rule set, and producing another set of information that actually is given to the jury to make a decision. Someone sees where I'm going. Which is exactly what an infomorph would be able to do very efficiently and very effectively. And just recently there's rather a controversial case where the use of probabilistic reasoning in court cases, so-called Bayesian networks, has actually been thrown out by the court. And a lot of people are very upset about this because what the courts are saying, none of this here are fantasy mathematics, thank you very much. Nobody can understand the reasoning behind it. We'll base it on good, solid kind of human judgment and advocacy. So it may be that lawyers are concerned that in the future the balance of judgments might be makeable by an electronic system in a way that they are just now. As to the specifics that you were saying about the insurance element to it, I think it's a very interesting idea, and the next time I speak to one of my lawyer friends, I will mention it, see what they say.
I think it's important to remind ourselves that we're talking within a very specific frame here. It's interesting that you were in Germany whilst you were having that conversation, a country where you need liability insurance to walk down the street, where everything is governed by the possession of that personal liability insurance. But that's one country and one culture, and not all cultures and countries have that kind of insurance or indeed those kind of laws. So that we might end up with a situation where we have countries who are pushing the legal boundaries much more than others, where we can explore, I imagine, well, I've left Germany for Brazil, where the thing about cosmetic surgery is you can do anything. There's no restrictive legislation at all. The only restriction is money. That's why we have so many transvestites in Rio. I think I digressed there. Sorry. So, what if a robot car kind of drives? You kind of run someone down. Well, I think that probably what we're going to end up with a situation where people are blaming it on faulty drivers. which is as far as I'm going to go with that.
I'll just add quickly, I just thought about dog licenses actually, and you know the kind of Rottweiler, or the bad, horrible dogs that you have out there. Maybe it's like that, you know, the possible robots that would be possibly really evil or really could hurt you would have to have special licenses, but the nice little ones that, like the little Hoovers, would be fine, you know. So
remember the past
dogs, yeah. Anything to add?
We've just been spending a lot of time together. There's nothing going on.
Have you got any more questions?
We can speak at the same time. Well, I wanted to stick on the same topic. I mean, this idea of liability and responsibility. I wanted to suggest that we're already talking about it in a way that I think is unhelpful. Picking up on what Dan was saying and what Kevin Slavin said in his TED talk, we seem to already be talking about algorithms as if they have their own agency. And those, the trading algorithms in particular, it seems to me that either they did what they were supposed to do, in which case it's the fault of the designers because they didn't foresee a set of circumstances, or they didn't do what they were supposed to do, and then of course it's the fault of the people who built them. And also in Slavin's TED talk, he talked about the algorithms are literally changing the geography of our world. I mean, the railroads did, and yet no one would describe agency to railroads. I mean, there's people behind all these things, and we lose sight of that very easily because we so naturally ascribe personality and agency to these autonomous things. And similarly, just to finish up, another example, I mean, more and more people now are talking about how Google is filtering the way we see our world. That Google's algorithms are filtering the way we see our world. But it's not the algorithms, it's the people at Google. And we shouldn't lose sight of, it's people that do these things. It's not these out-of-control algorithms.
Very, very quick thing to that. And I just thought I'd add it because it's on the subject of sex toys, and I thought it might be worth saying something more about. And it interested me about the sex toys thing because we talked about how we might be able to program something in on this thing about personality and how it may be given a name and a style. And then I thought about the prevailing sex toys out there. And there are, I believe, this is not personal experience, but you've got those love dolls. Now, they're not even robots. They're lifeless pieces of plastic, and frankly, they look terrible, but they look vaguely humanoid. Now, I presume that these things work because the guys who take these things home project some kind of personality to some degree or some kind of attachment onto them. And as robots, they ain't very good. And so is there a sense of, I've heard some of the words skating around this thing about narrative, this idea about story, is what makes a robot a story. It's that it affords a story to be projected upon it by people, just to add to that. And so whether it's a dumb piece of plastic or anything, what we actually do all the time is project the story. And maybe to get us across this gap in the graph, all we need is an ability, an affordance of a story to be told. And that little thing is a real person because it actually has a sequence through time. Something did it then, I know what it's like when it does this. Something Hoover can be irritating or picky. We do it all the time. And maybe that's our secret, rather to chase some reality or human visual thing. Maybe that's what we really need to be doing.
My question came first.
I was still waiting for the question. Those were two big statements, right? You want us to respond to those big statements?
Well, okay, I would say, what do you think of that alternative view? I think it's unhelpful when we destroy agency and say, we've got a problem. I don't think we've got a problem. We do have a problem with people.
All right. I'll answer the second question first. This idea about projection of identity into inanimate objects. And I agree that a robot is a robot in the eye of the beholder, maybe. But there is an issue of design here, of reaching a certain sweet point of fidelity at which the beholder can apprehend the object as more real than at other points. My favourite example of this is film. There is a sweet spot at 24 frames per second. Too slow, everybody can spot the gaps, it's not realistic. Too fast, well, there's more information than the human eye can perceive. But you get around that 24, 25 point, and you've got something where you've got people saying, this is reality. My mother told me about the first time she saw TV when she was a child, and actually believed that there were little people in the box. You know, that's the sweet point that you want to hit. And so there is a technical issue around what you're talking about as well. Now, to come to the first question about human responsibility, I have to disagree with you completely. Yes, humans bear responsibility for a lot of mess, but we understand that fairly well. We've got pretty good mechanisms that we've developed over thousands of years for dealing with humans and their actions and understanding them. What we don't have is an understanding of non-human agencies that interfere with or drive human actions. And this is actually what the majority of the human sciences are about. This is why we have such thing as psychology. This is, on the other hand, why we have such thing as Marxism. And I'm interested in the non-human agents that drive particularly the evolution of technology, because this is where the kind of ontological ground for me saying we'll have to simply adapt to the robots we get comes from. If they evolve, then either we learn to leverage that evolution to our advantage, or we just put up with what we get. Because novelty happens that way. Technology does evolve. It's not invented by geniuses. And so I'd say that actually your area of concern is something that's very well understood. And it's more important to look at what we don't understand. And that area is what intersects with our robot futures.
I think I just totally agree, except I'll probably sort of say it's more the problem is like, there's lots of shaking of the head there. I wouldn't even say it's robots or agents, it's just very complex, messy systems we're not very good at mapping and understanding. And so to your point of, you know, who ascribing agency to the things that Kevin's identifying in his TED talk, it's trying to pin, as he says, pin butterflies to the wall so that we can start to build better models of what was going on, so we can hopefully not screw up so bad next time. It's not only why we have psychologists, why we have meteorologists as well, right? It's kind of big messy systems that we just try and keep headbutting with science until we get somewhere.
I'll just come back a bit on the projection of narrative into the inanimate object. And actually, usually when I'm doing keynotes, I have a keynote called The Shapeshifters. And I think, well, you know, I'm kind of with you really, because I think we need to realise we're doing that all the time. And whether it's onto our teddies or onto our, you know, toys, or as children, you know, running around a room, being a tiger one minute, being Robin Hood the next minute, we're shape-shifting at all points, and we're projecting that onto whatever it is we want to play with or engage with, or, you know, run a narrative alongside. So for me, I find that fascinating in terms of avatars and robotics, yeah, and actually how we deal with multiple identities and can shapeshift between them. So I kind of with you on the fact we mustn't make this all seem like it's never happened before. You know, the railroads, you're right, were very important, and the Industrial Revolution was just as important as the digital revolution. So I'm kind of with you on that, but also to follow through some of those points about relativity and dealing with the other and dealing with yourself within those situations. We can, I think, learn a lot from the human side too. So.
Yeah, okay. I would agree with that. I think the human brain is an extremely complex structure, an extremely complex system, and we're only beginning to understand some of the elements that actually make it work. And clearly, this whole thing of narrative giving meaning is is critically important. It's the basis of anthropomorphism. And we do it all the time in the same way that we have parts of our brain that recognise faces in curtains, even though we know fine well that there's no faces in curtains, or detuned television sets. And they created a religion in America with that, where you take a picture of a detuned television set and you go, look, there's a face in there, that's the dead speaking to you. Why? Because it's hardwired into our brain. And so actually what we're talking about here as much is learning about ourselves and our brains, and how our brains interpret the world around it with these new types of artifacts, or these new kinds of ways of processing information that we have available to us now, be it infobots that we call them, be it infomorphs, be it robots, whatever we want to call them. We're inhabiting a new world where, in part of it, is a reflection of what's going on in our brain as much as what's going on in the physical and mental world around us, I would think. It's small and it's a printer.
Thank you very much for that. I know there are still a few unanswered questions, but hopefully there'll be a bit of time after having drinks next door where you can ask some of the speakers your questions. But for now, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Matt, Ghislaine, Dan, and Peter. So thank you very much. And everyone can go and have a drink next door now.